Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. There is a piece of legislation moving through Washington that could completely change the future of cryptocurrency in America. It could decide which digital assets are treated as securities, which are treated as commodities, which companies are allowed to operate, and which projects suddenly find themselves locked out of the world's largest financial market. Coinbase believes it could end years of regulation by enforcement. Cryptocurrency investors believe it could unlock the next wave of institutional adoption. Its opponents believe it could weaken investor protection, create dangerous loopholes for decentralized finance, and allow politicians to write rules governing an industry from which they are personally profiting. And after months of negotiations appeared to be falling apart, the Clarity Act may suddenly be alive again. President Donald Trump has reportedly agreed to an ethics provision intended to restrict the cryptocurrency activities of senior government officials, potentially removing the biggest remaining obstacle standing between the bill and a full Senate vote. But there is a catch. The final wording has still not been publicly released. The Democrats whose votes are needed have not been properly briefed. The White House is already calling the concession historic, while some lawmakers are questioning whether a rule enforced by Trump's own Department of Justice would have any genuine power over him. So tonight, we are going to explain exactly what the Clarity Act would change, why this ethics argument became so important, which cryptocurrencies and companies could benefit, who could lose, and whether this really is the law that finally brings cryptocurrency into the American financial system. Before we get into it, follow the podcast so you do not miss our daily crypto roundup or daily crypto deep dive. And anyone signing up to KRAKEN through our link can message us after completing the required steps to claim 20 XRP. Terms and eligibility apply. To understand why the Clarity Act matters, we need to understand the problem it is trying to solve. For years, the United States cryptocurrency industry has operated without a clear legal boundary separating a cryptocurrency security from a cryptocurrency commodity. The Securities and Exchange Commission has repeatedly argued that many tokens were initially sold as investment contracts and should therefore fall under securities law. The cryptocurrency industry has argued that the rules were never written for decentralized networks, and that companies were being punished for failing to comply with a registration system that did not properly accommodate them. The result was years of lawsuits, settlements, enforcement actions, and uncertainty. Projects did not know whether launching a token would result in the Securities and Exchange Commission taking them to court. Exchanges did not know whether listing a particular cryptocurrency could later be described as facilitating the unregistered trading of securities. And investors frequently discovered that the legal status of an asset could change based on the opinion of whichever regulator happened to be speaking that week. The Clarity Act attempts to replace that uncertainty with legislation. Its central purpose is to divide responsibility between the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission would retain authority over genuine securities, investment contracts, and the fundraising transactions used by companies to raise money. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission would receive broader responsibility for spot market trading in digital commodities. That sounds technical, but the practical effect could be enormous. A blockchain project may initially raise money through a transaction that is regulated in a similar way to a securities offering. But the token itself would not necessarily remain a security forever if the underlying network becomes sufficiently functional and decentralized. That distinction is extremely important. It separates the contract through which an asset was originally sold from the asset that may later trade independently on an open network. This is one of the arguments that has surrounded XRP for years. The legal question was never simply whether XRP itself was permanently a security. It was also whether particular sales of XRP were investment contracts, because of how they were offered, who purchased them, and what those buyers were promised. A clearer statutory framework could reduce the ability of regulators to treat every token, every transaction, and every exchange listing as part of the same legal question. That does not mean every cryptocurrency becomes legal. It does not mean every token is suddenly a commodity. And it absolutely does not mean projects will be allowed to raise money from investors without disclosures. The legislation creates a tailored disclosure system for token issuers. It preserves anti-fraud powers, introduces restrictions intended to reduce insider abuse, and gives regulators the ability to pursue manipulation, misleading statements, and deliberate evasion. Centralized exchanges, brokers, and dealers would also face registration and compliance requirements. The biggest immediate winner would probably be Coinbase. Coinbase has spent years arguing that American law does not provide a workable route for registering large parts of its cryptocurrency business. Under a clearer framework, Coinbase could potentially list assets using defined statutory tests rather than attempting to predict whether the Securities and Exchange Commission might object several years later. That would reduce legal risk, lower compliance uncertainty, and make the company more attractive to institutional investors. It explains why Coinbase shares reacted so strongly when reports of the ethics breakthrough emerged. Circle could also benefit. A clearer division between payment stablecoins, digital commodities, and securities would make it easier for financial institutions to build products around USDC without worrying that the regulatory foundations could suddenly change. Bitcoin would remain the easiest asset to classify because it has no conventional issuer and has long been treated as a commodity. Ethereum would likely benefit from greater certainty around decentralized networks. XRP could benefit because the law would move the market away from the idea that a token must carry the legal status of every transaction through which it was previously sold. Solana and other established networks could also benefit, but none of them should assume automatic protection. Their legal treatment would depend on the final definitions, disclosures, network structure, and degree of control exercised by insiders. The bill also contains important provisions affecting decentralized finance. Supporters say software developers should not be treated like banks merely because they publish code that allows users to interact directly with a blockchain. The legislation therefore attempts to protect developers who do not control customer assets and to preserve the right of individuals to hold their own cryptocurrency. A developer maintaining open-source software would not automatically become a financial intermediary, but a company claiming to be decentralized while controlling transactions, collecting substantial fees, and making operational decisions could still fall inside the regulatory system. That distinction between controlling software and merely writing software could become one of the most important parts of the entire law. The dispute over decentralized finance is also where some of the bill's strongest criticism begins. Democratic members of the Senate Banking Committee have argued that the proposed framework leaves significant anti-money laundering gaps. They believe certain businesses connected to decentralized protocols could avoid the requirements that apply to ordinary financial institutions, even when those businesses are earning substantial amounts of money from transactions. They have also raised concerns about cryptocurrency mixers, sanctions enforcement, terrorist financing, and foreign actors using stablecoins to move funds outside the traditional banking system. Supporters of the bill reject the claim that it is soft on financial crime. They say it applies Bank Secrecy Act requirements to centralized exchanges, brokers, and dealers, strengthens sanctions compliance, increases resources for financial crime enforcement, and gives the Treasury Department new powers to respond to high-risk foreign cryptocurrency activity. This is one of the most important debates around the Clarity Act. The disagreement is not really over whether money laundering should be illegal. Everyone agrees that it should be. The disagreement is over where regulation should stop. Should anyone who writes or maintains software be responsible for every transaction that passes through it? Or should legal responsibility apply only when a person or company controls the service, customer funds, or transaction process? Make the definition too wide and genuinely decentralized technology becomes almost impossible to operate. Make it too narrow, and companies may deliberately structure themselves to appear decentralized while retaining enough control to profit from illegal activity. Then we reach the issue that nearly killed the entire bill: political ethics. Donald Trump and members of his family have developed extensive cryptocurrency interests, including meme coins and World Liberty Financial. Financial disclosures have intensified concerns that a president could influence cryptocurrency regulation while simultaneously benefiting from the industry being regulated. Democratic negotiators therefore demanded restrictions on the ability of senior government officials to profit from cryptocurrency while holding office. Senators Ruben Gallego and Angela Alsobrooks helped advance the bill through the Senate Banking Committee, but made clear that their committee votes did not guarantee support during the final Senate vote without a serious ethics provision. Trump has now reportedly agreed to what the White House describes as an extremely broad restriction. That sounds like a major breakthrough. However, nobody outside the negotiations can properly judge the concession until the text is released. We do not yet know precisely which officials would be covered. We do not know whether existing holdings would need to be sold, placed into a genuine blind trust, or simply disclosed. We do not know whether immediate family members would be included. And we do not know whether the rule would be enforceable by independent authorities or almost entirely dependent on the Department of Justice. That enforcement question could decide whether Democrats accept the compromise. A restriction is only meaningful when the person allegedly breaking it cannot control the organization responsible for enforcing it. Even if the ethics language is accepted, the bill still has several hurdles remaining. It needs enough support to reach the 60-vote threshold normally required to overcome Senate obstruction. The Senate's Banking and Agriculture Committees have worked on different parts of the regulatory framework, meaning the final legislation must bring those approaches together. Any Senate version that differs from the legislation already approved by the House must then be reconciled. The House must accept the final language before the bill can be sent to the President. And all of this is happening against a tight political deadline. The Senate is preparing to leave Washington for its summer recess, and the approaching midterm elections will make bipartisan legislation increasingly difficult. Prediction market traders have increased the probability of the Clarity Act becoming law during 2026, but the market is still pricing substantial risk that negotiations fail. That is probably the correct way to look at it. The bill is closer than it was last week, but it is not finished. From an investment perspective, passage would not guarantee that every cryptocurrency immediately rises. Some of the optimism may already be reflected in cryptocurrency prices in companies such as Coinbase. There could even be a sell-the-news reaction if traders build large positions before the vote. The bigger effect would be measured over several years. Clearer legislation would make it easier for banks, asset managers, payment companies, and pension providers to enter the market because they could finally assess the legal risk properly. Capital prefers rules it can understand. Institutions do not require regulation to be perfect. They require regulation to be predictable. Our view is that the Clarity Act would be a major net positive for the cryptocurrency industry, but only if the final definitions are strong enough to prevent companies exploiting the word decentralized as an escape route from responsibility. The current system has failed. Regulating an entire technological industry through lawsuits after the activity has already happened is inefficient, expensive, and unfair to both businesses and investors. But replacing uncertainty with weak rules would create a different problem. The best version of the Clarity Act would protect genuine software development and self-custody, clearly regulate centralized intermediaries, preserve strong anti-fraud enforcement, and prevent politicians from personally profiting from decisions they make while holding office. The next document matters more than any headline. Until the final ethics language is public and the necessary Democrats confirm their support, the Clarity Act remains a live negotiation rather than an accomplished victory. But for the first time in weeks, there is a credible route towards passage. And if the bill becomes law, July 2026 may be remembered as the moment cryptocurrency stopped operating on the edge of the American financial system and was finally given a permanent place inside it. Follow Crypto News today for the latest developments as the text is released and the Senate vote approaches. Nothing discussed in this episode constitutes financial advice. Cryptocurrency remains volatile and high risk. Thank you for listening. We will see you at the top.